right, fabulous.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carla McNeil from Learning Matters, and it is an absolute privilege this afternoon to be introducing you to Laura Stewart, who is an absolutely incredible woman who I'm going to completely introduce shortly. But good afternoon, but good evening to you, Laura, because I understand it's evening where you are.
Yes, thank you very much. It's such a privilege to be here. Yes, I'm tuning in from Chicago, Illinois, and so it's about 7:30 here in the evening on the 14th. So I am delighted to be here.
Thank you so much. I'd like to take a moment, Laura, just to officially introduce you, if you're okay with that. So Laura Stewart is an educator and organisational leader who has served as a classroom teacher, building and district administrator, adjunct professor, director of numerous professional development initiatives around the United States. And before joining the Reading League as the national director, Laura served as the Vice President of Professional Development for the Roland Reading Foundation and as the Chief Academic Officer for Professional Development at Highlights for Children. Laura presents nationally and internationally and has written for numerous organisations and publications, including co-authoring the Everything Guide to Informational Text K2 Best Text Best Practices. Laura is the host of the podcast, Teaching, Reading and Learning, the TRL podcast, and she serves on several advisory boards, including the International Foundation of Effective Reading Instruction. Laura is a certified letters trainer, and her passion is empowering educators to positively impact all students and ultimately change the course of literacy achievement across the United States. Wow, it's incredible. It's an incredible privilege to be having you join us on this chit chat and to bring you to the shores of New Zealand, Laura. Let's hope that one day we can do that in person, yeah?
Wouldn't that be wonderful? And thank you. You know, I just want to say, you know, I've been in education for a really long time. And so I have been fortunate and privileged to have so many different experiences, you know, but I am like every other educator who's tuning in. My passion is for kids. My passion is to play whatever role I can to ensure that all of our children become joyful, literate citizens, and to thrive and to flourish. You know, I don't want our kids just to be competent readers. I want our kids to enjoy the benefits of a literate life. And I'm sure many people that are tuning in today share that mission. So that's the core of me. I've had lots of experience. But again, I'm pretty old. I've been around a long time. But that's really the core of me.
Thank you so much. So we really have sort of 4 key questions that we wanted to tap into today. And the first one is, Laura, can you tell us in brief what actually is the Reading League and why was the Reading League formed?
Great. Yes. So the Reading League is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to advance the awareness, understanding, and use of evidence-aligned reading instruction in schools. And that those 3 parts are really important because we want to raise awareness that there is this body of evidence that has been around over 40 years around what we are terming the science of reading, but it's evidence-based practices. And then we want to help people deepen their understanding. So we want to raise awareness with all stakeholders. And by the way, I believe all of us are stakeholders, educators, but also citizens and parents and business people and university professors, and all of us are stakeholders in ensuring that our children become literate citizens. And so our idea is that we want to raise that awareness, but then we also want to deepen that understanding. You know, our primary goal is teacher knowledge, and how do we help teachers have a deep understanding around this evidence base so that they can apply that. And that's the third part of our mission, is to really apply those evidence-based practices in their teaching. And I think we really, just to tell you a little bit about our, you know, we're a very grassroots organization. And I say sometimes, when I describe us, we were born out of people's collective frustration, because there were a group of people, and I was not part of the original group, a group of people in Syracuse, New York, from different walks of life, university professor, speech language, parents, tutors, interventionists, public schools, I said university professor, authors, researchers, who came together because they understood there was this body of evidence. Many of them had studied under Benita Blackman at Syracuse, and yet they weren't seeing it in their different walks of life. They weren't seeing it in their schools. They weren't seeing it in practice. They weren't seeing it as common knowledge. And so our founder, whose name is Dr. Maria Murray, she decided to just form a group, and she deliberately chose the word league. They really wanted it to be a league of people who all play important roles in this, all, equally important contributions, with the idea that, hey, let's just raise awareness around our hometown here, Syracuse, New York. And so they started hosting events for educators to bring that knowledge to their understanding. And they thought, oh yeah, it would be great if we get, 25, 30 people. And when hundreds of people started coming and driving in and calling and wanting to know more, they kind of figured, wow, we're really onto something. And so the Reading League has really served a need. And I'm a firm believer in when there is a need when there's a void or a need or a gap for something, when there is a movement to fill that gap, there's a bit of destiny in that. And so that the organization really was born out of that need to proliferate this body of evidence that has been around for such a long time but hasn't made it into the mainstream thinking. So since then, the Reading League has grown exponentially. It's gone from this grassroots organization 5 years ago to a national, and I would say international, awareness and organization that people look toward to help kind of lead this charge. One of my roles is to help expand the organization into a national organization, essentially, and to help build chapters in the United States here in different states. And we've gone from having no chapters a year and a half ago to having 12 chapters, so 12 states. And we hope soon that we might be able to expand into an international, into having international branches. So we host, again, awareness, understanding, and use. Those are our, key words. And so we host to those missions. We host live events, including a national conference, which is virtual right now, but we hope to be in person again soon. We host live events where we have, some of the top people in the field speaking about this, the evidence base and the practice of that. We have a journal, and our journal is a really one-of-a-kind journal in that we are bridging evidence to practice, because even though there has been this body of evidence, it doesn't necessarily make it into classrooms. And you mentioned my podcast. Thank you for giving a shout out to the podcast. And but that's been just such a privilege to me, because I've been able to speak to some of my heroes, like Louisa Moats and David Kilpatrick and Marianne Wolfe and Anita Archer, and just some of these trailblazers.
Absolutely.
In the world of education. And we also host, just simply on our website, I encourage people to join our website. Just get on our website and join us. It doesn't cost anything to join us. www.thereadingleague.org. We have so many assets just for people to tap into on our knowledge page, on our YouTube channel. So we're really all about sharing out this information in whatever avenue we can.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And what is really exciting from the place that I sit, because obviously I work with a team here at Learning Matters, but I also sit as part of the steering group of Lifting Literacy Aotearoa. And so that is a grassroots advocacy organisation, Laura, where we have developed a body of people who come with different experience, and they have different expertise. And so it is really exciting to think that there may be, here in New Zealand, a very similar grassroots organisation beginning to develop.
Yes.
And a couple of things that you said during that time really resonated me. And what I'm sensing from you during that discussion is that all of those experts and those stakeholders that have come together to form the Reading League have really experienced and trailblazed exactly what we are currently experiencing here in New Zealand. That, you know, there is such a need to grow awareness of this evidence base. There is such a need for our classroom teachers and our school leaders to have support to bridge these findings into their practice. And there is such a need for us to drive this forward from a place of being really supportive and very positive, and but also open to listening to all of the research and all of the perspectives out there. So could we go now to you sharing, because really recently we've had some really mixed perspective and across New Zealand around this body of research that is termed the science of reading. And I think it would be really great to hear from you, you know, as you represent the Reading League, from your perspective, what has the science of reading taught us that teachers would be, I'm going to be bold and say that we would be irresponsible if we didn't take heed of these findings? What are the key things that the science of reading has taught us?
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to say congratulations to you for heading up, you know, this movement. I mean, that's just such a wonderful thing. And I do, you know, you mentioned you know, supporting one another. I just want to, before I answer your question, I just want to say that, you know, we really want to meet people where they are and help support them, because I will say a lot of this reflects my own journey. I came up as a teacher during the whole language years, and so that's all I ever knew. And so when I first learned about this evidence base, it was a watershed moment for me personally. And I think a lot of us, for many of us, and I speak to teachers literally all over the country. I've been in professional development for many years, and many teachers will say, why didn't I learn this in my teacher preparation program? And some of us, myself included, kind of carry out a little guilt around that. And I think it's important to remember, you know, first of all, there's no shame, there's no blame here. You know, this is just about how do we learn and keep moving forward. And it's not about working harder. And I want teachers to really know that. It's about working smarter. I believe that when we understand this preponderance of evidence that reaches certain conclusions around how children learn to read and how instruction needs to match that, that's a very empowering thing. It's not meant to make us feel overwhelmed. It's meant to be really empowering, because it helps us pare down our practice and kind of hold that evidence as a litmus test to help us weed out what's the highest impact, reaches the largest number of children, and let everything else, you know, go. And that's the hardest thing to do, right? Because all of us as teachers have, you know, things that we love to do or want to do or have worked with many children. We're trying to say is, how do we cast the widest swath around the largest number of children first time? And I would say, to kind of distill it down into, you know, what is the essence of that knowledge that is different maybe from what I was taught. You know, first, number one, reading is not natural. And I'm very passionate about that idea, because again, as coming up as I did in teaching, the idea was that, look, hey, kids learn to speak by immersion and modeling and exploration. So let's apply those same practices to literacy. Let's immerse them in books, and let's model for them how real reading works, and let's let them explore print. And somehow, you know, through osmosis, that's going to sink. And while certainly that is true for some people, it's a very, very small percentage. And so the idea that, you know, reading is not natural because the written code has not been with us for a very long time as a human species. We don't have those neural networks in place, and instruction is what builds those neural networks. That starts with the understanding of the alphabetic principle, because English is an alphabetic language. So I would say that, primarily that's the first thing I think we need to kind of myth bust, is this idea of reading being natural, which then leads to the conclusion that instruction really counts, specifically explicit instruction really counts, because it isn't a naturally occurring, event, that we just emerge as readers and writers. And then I think the other piece that is really important to remember is that we know so much more now, especially in the last 20 years, because of the magnetic resonance brain imaging. We know so much more about the process of learning to read, how children acquire that fundamental alphabetic understanding, how they begin to put phonemes and graphings together, how from that fundamental understanding we layer on our vocabulary and our background knowledge and our understanding of syntax and all those language comprehension capabilities, along with the word recognition skill. And of course, that's represented by the simple view of reading, that equation that word recognition times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. Just understanding that as the process in which we acquire the ability to read and write, that's really fundamental to the science of reading. It's just bringing forth that evidence that came from theory and has since been secured through evidence and through the neuroscience, bringing that to bear with teachers. If I understand how that process unfolds, looking at Linnea Airey's phases, if I understand how that process unfolds, and I understand that there are certain skills and capabilities as represented by Hollis Scarborough's reading rope, if I could put all that together as my foundation, that helps me make choices every day. And it helps me diagnose and assess children. What is the missing, think about Scarborough's rope. What's the missing strand? And how do I help fill that gap so that all those strands can interweave and result in skilled reading as represented by her rope? So those foundational conceptual models of the simple view and the reading rope and Airey's phases really provide that secure foundation for us as teachers that then can translate into instructional decision making every day.
Absolutely. The last 2 days, I mentioned to you earlier, Laura, I've had the privilege of working with a large group of teachers right, in different parts of the country. And we explored those things, and we also explored looking into from a science-based perspective of what neuroscience has offered us, the process of how we develop that reading brain. And when we as teachers have that knowledge, you don't need the scanning machines in your schools, do you? Because you carry that knowledge. And in New Zealand, we would say it becomes part of your teaching kite. Nobody can take that away from you. And I think what you're saying here in terms of, those key points around reading is not a natural process. We have to know about the instruction that builds that process. Instruction really counts. That instruction has to be explicit. And as Dr. Anita Archer would say, for our novice and our struggling learners, we must teach them from explicitly first for them to be able to lead into a discovery type learning approach. And then, like you said, we now know so much more. And we would always say, when we know better, we do better.
Yes.
So I just want to now sit in that place of, where would in your experience, where is the best place for teachers to start? I think it's a pardon the pun no-brainer that building teacher knowledge, on the whole is an incredibly important place to start, because without knowledge you will find it very difficult to adjust your practice.
Right. Yeah.
So is there one? We will have people who are with us today who are on one of 3 train carriages. They're either right in the front and they're wanting to drive that train forward to leave the train. They might be in the middle carriage and they're kind of still looking to the front, and they're looking to the back and they're thinking, am I going to go into that front carriage and really go full whole hog into this? And we'll have some Laura that are in the 3rd carriage, and they're actually trying to unlock the back door to jump off the tracks and roll down the hill because they don't want to be on
Sure. Yes.
So let's just think about maybe the people in the middle carriage, you know, obviously they can come to the Reading League, but if you think to source extra information, but you know, if there was one key piece of information out there, or you've mentioned a few already, where would you suggest those people start to really secure their belief that they are totally on the right pathway?
Yes. So I think those are great questions. And I do want to say, you know, you mentioned that this knowledge base is so critical, and we that's the core, like I mentioned, is what we do, because without the knowledge, we're rudderless, right? Like you can hand a teacher a curriculum, but it's not the curriculum that teaches the children. It's the teacher and the right tools in her hands of in the hands of a skilled teacher. It's like the magic combination, right? But without that knowledge base, we are rudderless. And so, you know, that's what's critical. So I do agree with you. You know, and that's why we at the Reading League are trying to offer a variety of different, what I call points of entry. So, you know, one of the things that I would encourage some of the teachers that may be skeptical or maybe less curious about it, we have started a movement called the Defining Movement. And so you can check out whatisthescienceofreading.org. Whatisthescienceofreading.org. And this particular webpage is all about our defining movement. And what we've set out to do with that defining movement is to really kind of put a stake in the ground and say, this is what the science of reading is. Because I'm not sure what's happening in New Zealand, but here in the United States, what we're finding is it's becoming a bit of a buzzword. And so it's kind of showing up in a lot of places and labeling a lot of, you know, practices and materials that aren't necessarily aligned with the science of reading. So we've put a bit of a stake in the ground and said, let's collectively, and this wasn't just the Reading League, this was a consortium of other players surrounding the Reading League's efforts, to say, what is the definition of the science of reading? What's the rationale for this? Why is this so important? What is the science of reading, but what isn't the science of reading? And when we say evidence-based, what does that mean? You know, for something to be valid and high quality evidence. For the average lay teacher who may not have had, these terms, you know, sample size and qualitative and quantitative and effect sizes in her teacher preparation program, how do you sort through what's evidence and what is not? So this whatisthescienceofreading.org, I think, is a really nice starting place for people who are curious about the science of reading or who have heard mixed messages around the science of reading. The second place I would encourage people to go, at least from our standpoint, is we have a YouTube channel, and we have lots of free, great videos that people can just tap into and watch and listen, and listen on your headphones while you're taking your walk, and just get immersed in these ideas. And I have to give a shout out to my podcast. I'm a big podcast junkie myself, and so again, when I walk, I just put on my earphones and listen and share ideas. So these are some of the assets I think that we have for people who are new to the science of reading or who know something and want to deepen their practice. We also offer, and I would highly encourage anybody from beginners through, people who are really, into the science of reading. We offer really high quality professional development, and we offer what we call an online academy. And this is, again, virtual, online academy. Small groups, we keep our groups small. And so it's very interactive, and it's designed to really build that deepened sense of knowledge, but also be in community so that you can share practice with others. We also have a Facebook page, and we have a teacher Facebook page. The Science of Reading is for you. So we have our general Reading League Facebook page, but we also have this, more interactive teacher Facebook page where you can interact with other people. on a social platform to really feel like you're part of community. So those are just a few of the things that I would say to check out from our perspective that are really good entry points
Yeah.
for people who are new, but also people who want to really, deepen their own understanding and build a community.
That's wonderful. Well, and we will take all of those little tidbits that you've given us, Laura, and then we'll likely pull all of that together, if that's okay with you, into a wee blog after this chit chat. And then people
That's
will be able to just
fantastic.
jump into that one place and be
Can
directed
I
to
can
all
I
of
say
those
one
great
other thing,
sources. Yeah,
Carla?
go for it.
Especially for those people who already are familiar with the science of reading and maybe have been practicing and really are looking to even fine tune or deepen their understanding. I highly recommend our journal.
Yes, agreed.
It's really good because it's taking some of the preeminent voices in the evidence-based, evidence-aligned reading instruction, science of reading movement, and it gives them you know, their space to really not only write, but also, again, bridge to practice. And
Yes.
we know that's been the missing link. Because the only reason that we know that is because there's been this body of evidence for a really long time and it hasn't translated to practice. So
Absolutely.
we're really
Yeah.
trying to create that link, that bridge.
Yeah, yeah. No, I would agree that journal is incredible.
Yeah.
One other thing that I want to dip into here. So you've talked about community, and I think that we can't downplay the importance of teachers and leaders who are wanting to make the move forward and ensure that we don't leave reading to chance, that we ensure our practice is current research and evidence based. That
Yes.
finding their community is really, really important, finding their tribe. So all of those things that you've given are really going to be helpful from an international perspective for us too, for people to see, that this is not just a movement that's occurring in New Zealand. It is very much an international movement that is occurring in education.
Absolutely.
Laura, I have observed recently across New Zealand that there are some people who don't so much outwardly advocate for the science of reading and then a structured literacy approach that stems from the findings of the science of reading, because they question certain aspects of the findings of science of reading. I find that I find it really interesting that people may not understand that the science of reading is the term for the entire body of empirical research that is represented through linguistics, through education, through neuroscience, and cognitive psychology. So I'm wondering if you were yourself in communication or correspondence with people that said, well, there are parts of the science of reading that I can sit with and agree with, but I don't agree with the science of reading as an entire body of research. I'm really interested to hear, and I know I've really thrown this one at you because we didn't talk about this, but I'm really interested to hear, what would your response be to those people?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think first of all, what I really want people to, first of all, I want to listen to that. I want to hear that. So when people say to me, well, I can ascribe to certain aspects of it, but not others, I really want to hear that. I really want to understand, what is it? What are the things that you ascribe to and why? What are the things that you doubt and why? Because I do think that fundamentally that's one of the things that we all have to do, is we all have to listen to one another. I mentioned we really want to meet people where they are, and I think that's an important part of bringing people along. I mean, because the one thing I always remember is, regardless of where we are, we all want the same thing.
Absolutely.
Right? Every teacher who comes to me and says, well, the science of reading, that's just phonics, she may think that, and I may be able to help her understand that the science of reading is not just phonics. However, I need to remember, she wants the same thing for her students that I want for my students. So the best thing about all of this, and about all this dialogue that we need to be having, and about all of these bridges we need to be building, is that we all want the same thing. So if we all recognize that, then I think the next step is to really listen and understand where are people coming from? Because I do think what's happened is that people do slot the science of reading and they say, well, that's just a philosophy. Or, well, I've been around long enough, the pendulum's swinging again.
Yeah, yeah.
Or it's just phonics. Or it's, oh, the science of reading, yeah, well, that's just a one size fits all. I mean, there are misconceptions around the science of reading, and I think we have to just continue to dispel those
Yeah,
misconceptions.
and the
Mm-hmm.
only way we can dispel those misconceptions, like you say, is to being open to discussion, is
Right.
to being open to discussion and listening with the intent to understand perspective. And because we have an intention to be able to ensure that every child becomes literate and
Right.
every person goes into adulthood with increased confidence and opportunity because they
Right.
are literate. And so,
Yes.
where we have people across the educational pathway who question, who wonder, who pose challenge, who present with different sets of belief, I think what we're potentially agreeing on is the importance of, where possible, sitting around a table or just connecting with those people to understand what those differences are. In fact, on Sunday, part of my day was spent watching reading recovery webinars.
Mm-hmm.
and,
Mm-hmm.
and and that was because they were about talking about their
Yeah.
perspective on the science of reading and
Yeah.
all of these different things. And I thought, as someone who is working really hard to influence, empower, and enable teachers across this country, I need to understand the
Yes, right.
perspective. I need to understand why this might be challenging. I need to understand some parts that I might have missed in the process.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think we also, I mean, one of the things that I've come to understand is just the term science of reading is off-putting to some people because they think of
Yeah.
science as some kind of cold, hard thing, whereas teaching is relational. And
Mm,
there's some, for some people, there's a perception that there's a divide between those two. And if I'm choosing the science of reading, I'm neglecting the relational.
yeah,
And
that's
so what I always try to share with teachers is it's the science of reading and the art of teaching.
mm,
And the science of reading will empower you in this arena of the most important thing you're doing, which is teaching kids to read.
mm,
Whereas your art of teaching is still there, right?
I love
So
that.
really, each of them will empower the other. It's not an either or. So I think we
Mm,
need to dispel the idea that somehow science is cold and science is skill and drill, and explicit instruction means it's always the teacher in front of the kids dictating what happens. All of those things need to be, I think, dispelled. I also believe one of the best ways to do it is through story.
yeah.
Because I can stand up in front of people and talk about the research and cite, experts. But at the end of the day, if I can tell a story about, a school district, riddled with
Mm,
poverty and riddled with, underserved population and devastated, um, by kids coming to school less prepared than perhaps other communities, and show that school transformed through a relentless commitment to building
mm,
teacher knowledge, a relentless commitment to leadership at the helm, a relentless focus on everybody's shared vision and mission, and a relentless refusal to say we can't do this, right?
yeah,
And so
yeah,
if I can share that story, and that's one of the things I'm trying to do in the podcast, that's one of the things that we try to do, elevate those success stories of individual teachers in classrooms, but also schools and
mm,
districts, so that people can look at these humble stories. Many of these stories are people saying, wow, I thought we were doing well until we started looking at all of our data, and we started
yeah,
looking at those children who we were not serving, and until we kind of stepped back and said we're no longer going to accept that, we're going to change,
mm,
and taking that humble step back to say what do we need to know to move forward. So those
Yeah.
stories are also empowering and inspiring. And those are the stories that I think story is so important to this whole process.
I have two little things to add to what you're saying. So, one is that I completely agree with what you're saying about, I would say what we choose to ignore, we choose to accept. And clearly that's not my quote, it's one that I have adopted. But I do believe what we choose to ignore, we are in fact accepting. So if we continue to ignore the rates of lack of success in literacy, we're accepting the status quo. We're saying that the way we teach this is okay. And, there are far too many children, there are far too many adults who really, really struggle through life because they don't have those skills.
Yes.
I think that is so important for us to be challenging all the time, and we always need to be in that place of coming from continuous improvement, and we must model that ourselves as teachers and learners and leaders. And when you talk about story, I think it's really important for us to all understand is that no one person, no one organization will create this shift in education. We are all fundamentally responsible for that. So we want to hear those stories from parents. We want to hear those stories shared from classroom teachers and school principals. And I'm really proud to share with you, Laura, that right now across New Zealand, we have had pop up all of these amazing Facebook groups where we have teachers in different regions who are implementing structured literacy to varying degrees that are on those pages, sharing their stories, asking their questions, and those little communities that are building and blossoming are going to one day join together into one very big community. You can see it happening, which is really, really exciting.
Oh, I love that. You brought something to mind as you were, and I just jotted it down because you brought this to mind. One of the things that I think we all value in our children is their curiosity. And I think curiosity serves us well too, as well as human beings, but as educators. And I think I'm quoting Parker Palmer here. And Parker Palmer, if your listeners aren't familiar with his work, he's in my estimation, one of the world's great thinkers. And he's going to be on my podcast next month.
Wow.
He's a wonderful, just a wonderful human being. And one of the things I learned from him was, when in doubt, turn to wonder. When in doubt, turn to wonder. Because we tend to, oftentimes, when in doubt, we kind of tend to dig our heels in. It's kind of a human, reaction. But if we can turn to wonder, it might just break us open enough, to learn. And I go back to my own experience, when I first started learning a different way of being as a teacher, it broke my heart. It broke my heart because I thought about,
all those children.
If I'd known better, right? Right? And so, but sometimes the break lets the light in. What's the Leonard Cohen expression? But
I think that's a real,
lets the light in.
It's a real challenge because I can completely resonate with what you're saying, and what we experience is that teachers go through somewhat a grieving process, Laura, and you sit in this place of, oh my gosh, that Caleb that I taught when he was in year 6, if I had known then what I know now, his journey through life could have been quite different. And we really have to accept that it wasn't our fault, that we didn't know better, before we can sit in that place of having empathy with ourselves first and foremost. It's a tough time when you're sitting in that place of taking on all that new learning. And yeah, I'm really pleased you raised that. Thank you, because it is a real experience. It is a real piece of the experience of transition from potentially being a teacher in a balanced literacy or a whole language approach to coming into really totally understanding about the implementation of structured literacy because of the findings of the science of reading. And then coupled with that explicit instruction is a core piece of this. And I just want to lead into from there what you were talking about that combination of the science of reading and the art of teaching. And if I reflect on my own experience, I do believe that I was a good classroom teacher. But Laura, the knowledge that I've acquired through the science of reading has really, really helped me to become a great teacher of literacy. And it is something that I'm incredibly proud of. And I know other teachers would say the same across the country. The knowledge has built my practice. The knowledge, the wonder that you talked about has enabled me to reflect on my practice and to strive for continuous improvement, because you alluded to this earlier. The greatest resource that sits across from the children, the greatest resource that will influence any shift, is the teacher.
Yeah. I really want all of our teachers to really hear that. And I always tell teachers, be kind to yourself, right? Because maybe you didn't know this, okay? Maybe you didn't know this, but you connected with your students, and that was the most valuable thing that you can do, right? So be kind to yourself in a way that you would be kind to your best friend who said they didn't know something. You would say, well, but you know something now, So treat yourself, as your very best friend, or as a child with whom you are working, and be kind to yourself, and know that you've done right by your kids in the way that you've developed relationships and connections, and that you're on a journey, you're on a path. And I want to reassure you, beloved teacher, that once you know this, you can't unknow it. And it will change your life. It will change your practice. It will empower you. It will recommit you to your profession. And that's to me the hope and the promise of this, because I've been through that transformation myself, and I've been with many others who have as well.
So much wisdom that you share with us this afternoon. And what I'm hoping is probably going to be many teachers' lunch breaks, Laura. They're going to be sitting, eating their lunch and listening into this little chit chat. So on behalf of all of the teachers and leaders in New Zealand, I really, really want to thank you for so willingly giving your time to share your wisdom and to share all of those wonderful places. And like I said, we will pull all of that together and share that with the teachers and leaders across New Zealand. And in closing, Laura, I would like to hand the floor back to you, though. If there is one last message that you can share with the teachers and leaders across New Zealand, what would that message be?
Well, first of all, support one another, and look for those areas of support that you can find that can really empower you on your journey. And I guess another thing I just always say to teachers is thank you for entering this profession. It's a noble profession. It's a hard profession, and you are undertaking noble and challenging work when you're teaching a child to read. But never give up, because our children will reap the rewards of all of those efforts and all of that love that you pour into your job every day. And so I feel intense gratitude to teachers who do this work. And I am proud to be part of a community in which we can offer support to you. And I would encourage, if anybody wants to reach out directly to me, my email is laura@thereadingleague.org. I'm more than happy to connect with you, and I hope you connect with us. Become a member of the Reading League. It doesn't cost anything to be a member, and that will help you be part of a community in which we have here, but also, obviously, Carla, your community over there is becoming bigger and stronger and more robust. So seek out that community and support one another, and give yourself grace. Give yourself the grace to grow. Give yourself the grace to learn in the same way that you give your children grace.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Laura, for your time with us this afternoon.
My privilege. Thank you.
For those who have tuned into this session, I'm really pleased to let you know that our next chit chat is going to be with our very own William Tunma himself, which is incredible for us to hear from one of our very own. And we're going to be talking, Laura, about, of course, the simple view of reading and
Nice.
the developments around the simple view of reading, which we're
Give
very
him my
privileged to have.
thanks. Give him my
I will,
personal
don't
thank
you
you.
worry. So that is coming up for us next month in May. So
Great.
for now, good afternoon, everybody, and we wish you well. We're about to go into school holidays here, Laura. So for all our hardworking teachers,
have a
we
lovely,
wish them
lovely holiday, everybody.
a really
All right,
well-deserved break.
Wonderful.
Bye for now,
Thank you.
everybody.